Hello, listeners. Welcome
Oh, I want you to. I
to
want you
Page
to.
to Screen.
I
Do you
want you.
lie awake at night hearing the pages ruffle next to your bed on your nightstand?
No, because I read during the day. I'm
That's
sleeping at
fair.
night.
I mostly do as well. That's fair.
Well, if you didn't catch that from Cole's spot on impression of Hannibal Lecter, or the title of the video that you probably clicked on, we are here for another edition of Page to Screen. Focusing on The Silence of the Lambs, the blockbuster 1988 Thomas Harris novel that was turned into a multiple Academy Award winning film by Jonathan Demme in 1991. It swept the Oscars that year: Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Actor, Best Actress. There was something else, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, I named four, and I think there were five awards. I'll have to look that up later. But it did very well at the Oscars. It became a pop cultural phenomenon. It led to a number of sequels, its own television show from a few years ago, which, in full disclosure, I haven't watched. That's one of those things like I got to catch up with at some point in the far future when I have more time. But I heard great things about it. I'd also heard great things about The Silence of the Lambs, and I watched it only once when I was, I think, 13 or 14 years old. And then I watched it again yesterday after having read the novel. And very different experiences, very different senses of memory. But before we get into that, I want to welcome back Cole Rush of The Quill to Live, whose review of The Silence of the Lambs, the novel, will be out at some point shortly after you probably watch this video. And from what he told me before we started recording, he's got a very interesting take on it that I can't wait to read. So, Cole, welcome.
Oh, thank you, Ian. Thank you. One thing to add to your original adaptation, I guess, overview. I don't know why there was air quotes there. That's exactly what it was. But premiering the night we're this, so it will be out, is, I believe it's CBS's series Clarice, which does not look very good.
It's getting, I watched a YouTube video where someone was reading the Entertainment Weekly review of Clarice, and it was a masterful takedown. The show sounds terrible, but the review is such that it was almost so compelling I have to watch it now to see what it's like.
Just to see what they're lambasting. I love that when you kind of spite watch a show. But yes, I have no interest in watching it because I thought it was going to be some sort of adaptation deal, and now I realize that it's essentially a sequel, something like that. But not my cup of tea. Probably not going to give it a go. But yes, also my review will be live at some point. I don't actually know when, as of this recording. But I'm very excited for that too. So lots of Silence of the Lambs goodness going on in my life right now.
Well, and that's great. We could all use a bit more Hannibal Lecter. First of all, I got to criticize you for walking right past that beautiful pun, lambasting. Come on. And then,
God damn it.
and
There's like there's no better way to strike through the heart of Cole Rush than by telling him that he missed a pun.
Okay, I can edit that part out if you like. Well, no, I'm not going to do it.
No, leave it in. I need to learn from my mistakes.
And the other interesting thing is this was in the EW review, I think, so I haven't fact checked it, but I have no reason to believe it's not true, is one of the reasons it is a weird sequel to Silence of the Lambs, one in which Hannibal Lecter does not appear, is because there's some kind of a rights issue. I guess he can't. And maybe that's because I know Hannibal is an NBC show, so maybe they're kind of fighting over that. But
maybe he'll appear in the Avengers or something. I don't know.
I would love to see the Avengers go up against Hannibal Lecter. But
honestly, I might make Hannibal the favorite there.
I guarantee it, especially if imagine he got the powers of Loki, unstoppable. But
there we go.
So let's talk. Do you want to summarize the novel / film adaptation? I'm talking broad strokes because there is quite a difference between the two, but just give us the intersection of the two as far as the plot.
Absolutely. Agent / student at the FBI Academy, Clarice Starling, is basically called up by one of her superiors to interview Dr. Hannibal Lecter, who is now behind bars or behind a glass shield, as it were. And the intent is to find information about a new serial killer that's on the loose named Buffalo Bill, who is abducting people throughout the Midwest and the southern United States, and doing, heaven knows what to these women. And Jack Crawford, who is Clarice's supervisor slash mentor slash teacher in some ways, thinks that she could kind of break the case a little bit by talking with Hannibal Lecter, who previously has given no information to anybody. And essentially throughout the whole piece, she is uncovering clues about Buffalo Bill while also developing this weird pseudo relationship, rapport, friendship-ish thing with Dr. Lecter, which is, I'm sure we'll talk about, is super fascinating. But at the broadest possible strokes, it is a procedural crime thriller in which the main protagonist is trying to solve a bunch of murders and catch the serial killer.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note this is actually a sequel. There was the novel Manhunter, which came out before this, which they also turned into a film that came out before this. I think it was 1986, and this came out in 91. But they reference it a lot in the novel because, of course, Harris is writing a sequel to his own work. But in the film, Jonathan Demme and I think it's Ted Talley, the screenwriter, are not making a sequel to Michael Mann's film, so they're trying to do a standalone, so they don't reference what happened in Manhunter. And I have not read Manhunter, and I don't think I've seen it, at least not in a long time, but I do know there was another cop who was chasing a killer and Hannibal Lecter was involved somehow, and I guess that cop didn't end up in such a hot position after the case was over. Somehow he was horribly mutilated.
Well for him. Yeah. His name is Will Graham, and he certainly does not get some more.
Maybe it's good that you walk past some puns, Cole. Jeez. Anyway,
I've never seen one send you this far off the trail.
I've just become a human blue screen. But anyway, let me reboot. Okay, so the thing about this story that is so fascinating from the novel perspective is there's so much going on, and yet Harris, as an author, manages to juggle the 2 to 3 main story points and a handful of subplots, I think, very well. And what was kind of jarring about watching the film version is Jonathan Demme does great in adapting certain scenes that are taken from the book, but there's a lot of that, and I'll use this phrase I love, connective tissue, that is just dropped. Subplots, characters. Jack Crawford is a much richer character on the page, and there's more going on with him and Clarice Starling because he has a wife who's dying of cancer. There's Clarice has a roommate at the academy who is more of a character in the book as opposed to just popping up. As you see her in a couple of scenes, and then she has one scene where she actually gets to talk, and that's it. They mess around with the timeline, the relationships with Lecter, Buffalo Bill, and the people that they have in common in terms of their lives. And so watching the film, I'm like, it feels like it was an edited for TV version of a miniseries that I'm just missing all the really rich components of. And I know this is a culturally beloved film, but I got to give all props to the novel. And I think the movie kind of falls short.
I completely agree. I watched this with Erin, and she hasn't read the book, but she loves this genre. And she had seen the movie before. We were watching it together, and she goes, what do you think? And I just went, like, it was good. It was definitely good. I can't say that it's a bad movie because that would just feel objectively, I guess, subjectively untrue in my case. But this is just the classic reader's dilemma. The book was better. And how much story can you capture in 2 hours? And the answer is not as much as you can capture in 320 pages in the case of The Silence of the Lamb. However, the movie and the director and even the actors kind of made some good decisions in terms of what to leave out. Like, I get that you can't have every single side character play as much of a big role as they did in the book in the movie, but the moments that happen throughout the book, the payoff needs to be based on what you've learned of the characters before. And I feel that the only character that truly feels real and fleshed out in the movie is Hannibal Lecter himself, which is a shame because I think that Clarice Starling and Jack Crawford, as you mentioned, are 2 fascinating characters in the book. And I don't really attach to them very much in the movie. And you get these little bits of what the book's magic was, right? Like Jack Crawford's relationship with Clarice is a very interesting mentorship. He clearly wants to put God on a limb for her. He clearly understands her intelligence and her talents, but he also has to work within this system that is relatively unfriendly to young, attractive women who are within it, right? And he is navigating both of those things very interestingly, especially for a book from the 80s. It handles those issues well. And there's a moment that actually made it to the movie where Crawford goes, or where Clarice says, "You shouldn't have, cast me off in this room full of men." And he goes, "I'm sorry, you know why I had to, right?" And she goes, "Yeah, but it matters." And it's like those little moments are really interesting in the book. And having one of them in the movie to me was a treat. But that dynamic and just all of the inner workings of the FBI through the eyes of Jack Crawford and Clarice Starling are kind of diluted in the film version. And it's more of a let's just hunt for the killer type of deal.
Yeah, I really do feel that gap there. And I think part of it, like right off the bat, I understand what you're saying about not being able to cram everything in, but that opening sequence, like the credit sequence, it felt like it went on for 3 hours of Clarice Starling running through the training camp, all for this weird, I guess if you literally knew nothing about the movie or the book, walking in off the street, you'd be like, why is this girl in a sweatshirt running and jumping and doing all of this stuff? And then some guy approaches her and says, "You're wanted up at the building." And he turns around and it says FBI on his cap. I'm like, but it was like no payoff, right? So I feel like you could have taken that 3 or 5 minutes and put in some kind of a mention of Jack Crawford's wife, because I know I'm harping on it, but I can't overstate how important she was, because she doesn't even have any lines or scenes really in the book. She's like practically comatose and he's watching over her deathbed the entire time. But what that means to Jack, and what the effect that's having on Jack means to Clarice, as far as she wants to kind of befriend him, but she doesn't want to overstep her bounds. There's a hint, I don't think it's just from Hannibal Lecter, of a sexual desire possibly on Jack's part, because he's an older man, because she's an attractive young recruit. And Harris kind of plays with the idea that maybe there could be something, but is it really something, or is it just that man woman heterosexual desire thing? It's very subtle, and it doesn't ultimately it doesn't hinge on it, but it's a nice little bit of coloring that we don't really get in the film. I know Jodie Foster is an Academy Award-winning actress for this movie, and I think she's great in a lot of things. I could not stand her in this movie. Partially, it's this accent, which when I'm reading the novel and she's talking, I can imagine, okay, I know where she's from. Maybe she's got like a little Southern drawl, but she's doing like a weird, exaggerated Virginia accent with this kind of halting Kristen Stewart early stages of her career, like kind of a thing, like Dr. Lecter, Dr. Lecter, Dr. She's like talking into the phone at the end when he hangs up on her, doing that cliche thing where someone clearly hangs up the phone and yet the person on the other end is like yelling into it for like 6 more times. But her entire delivery throughout the movie, except for like 2 or 3 scenes when she's sort of hushedly talking like a regular person for some reason, it just really bugged me, especially in comparison to the great performance I think Anthony Hopkins turns in.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think in some ways it's a huge injustice to the character of Clarice, because at the beginning of the novel, you can kind of feel like the characters are a little bit cookie cutter, or that you might find them in any crime drama. But Clarice feels unique, and she has this really interesting backstory, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of like sadness, in her past. But you also get the sense in the book that she really loves what she's doing and is super interested in the work. And there's no nuance in the performance for me. It's all, I am just a Southern girl who's supposed to be like a little bit out of her element. Whereas the painting that I get from the book is, this is a really smart and capable person who has to use those smarts and capabilities to overcome obstacles that are just there because that's the way the FBI works, right? And it's there's so much to the performance that Clarice gives through Thomas Harris's writing that makes me think, okay, I understand her as a person. She has all these struggles that she's been working against, and still she's that passionate about her work. And many could probably say that the line of work she's chosen is like not particularly friendly to one's mental health, right? And still she's remained stable. And it's just in the movie, it feels like a kind of narrator self-insert. It's like a cookie cutter FBI character. And that's not even to disparage Jodie Foster. I just think she didn't. I wonder watching the movie if she read the book, because like I don't know. There are characters in movies that do that. Like in the Harry Potter series, Gary Oldman never read I don't think he read the books or understood the character of Sirius Black, which is kind of an exception, right? Because I think he plays the character very well.
Yeah.
But in this case, it's like you kind of have to understand what the character is coming from if it's just supposed to be a plain-ish person who has this background that she hides from everybody else. Because if you don't have that understanding, how are you going to play a nuanced and layered character in the film adaptation?
I wonder if the screenwriter read the novel too, or the director for that matter, and maybe they have. And Jonathan Demme is no longer with us, so I don't want to speak ill of the dead. But it's something that you just said, I think, really hit a chord with me, which is the idea of Clarice Starling in the book. We're kind of in her head a lot, so feel like I'm in the shoes of a really strong person who is, yes, in over her head, because she's still a student and she's getting called up to the big leagues. That's another whole subplot that's dropped, that there's sort of this ticking time bomb of she's traveling the country examining bodies and hunting down a serial killer while she still has like finals at the FBI, and she's in danger of getting recycled if she doesn't put enough time, which means she gets sent back to like a regional office and then has to wait 6 months to maybe get back into the academy or whatever. So there's this great ticking time bomb element of it, but she's so harried and so committed to her work and so tired all the time that she doesn't have almost the emotional baggage of giving a damn about the sexism that she's coming up against. She's just coming in, doing her job. She notices it and she processes it in a way that we, the reader, can feel. But from the outward, I was imagining the scenes that she's in, and there's nothing timid about her. It's almost like she's frustrated, but not. Here's a good example. The early scene where she gets on the elevator in the FBI to go up and see Jack Crawford, she's like a foot shorter than everybody else in the elevator. And that to me is almost like the filmmakers trying to give off this, not a virtue signal, but like use this kind of language like, see, it's a man's world and she's entering into it. And don't you feel sorry for him? Like, no, because I know this is Clarice Starling. I know who I'm in for. It's like the filmmakers have a different idea of who this character is than the novelist. And the novelist was far more, I think, progressive in his writing, especially for the time, as you mentioned, the 80s, than the people who were adapting it.
Yeah, in fact, there's a lot about the book that I think is like pretty prevalent now, and is it's interesting the way that he handles issues. And one particularly, we should talk about James Gumb at some point. Yeah. But the whole issue of how Thomas Harris handles transsexuality, being trans, in the book, I was actually very, very happy with it, because there's a scene with Dr. Danielson where he says, "My patients are my patients. This is a private thing. It's very difficult to go through." It's a very good and fulfilling scene to read through the lens of the 2020s, right? Because it shows that there was somebody sticking up for these marginalized folks who were struggling with their identity. Whereas in the movie, it's a guy who dresses up to kill women, which is just the most problematic way to stage it, unless you do the legwork to explain what is happening behind the scenes. The book does that, in my opinion. The movie does not. And it's the same case with the sexism within the FBI. Is you have this layered, complex machine that is the FBI organization that Clarice has learned to navigate pretty well for herself, and she's earned the respect of her colleagues, even though she shouldn't have had to work as hard as she did to earn it. She does. And then it's in the movie, it all just falls flat because you don't have the time to do that legwork. Well, I think they did, but then they chose to include some stuff that I'm just like, okay, like I'm going all over the place here, but it all kind of coalesces into the same point. There are two scenes in the movie where you see a young Clarice Starling played by like some young girl actress, and that's it. Like give me at least the rule of threes. Like these past scenes just feel like filler to me when she could be telling those stories to Hannibal, which in the book she does, right? It's almost as if like they had the bare outline of the book and they were like, I like to be myself, I'm going to color outside the lines. And then they just kind of broad strokes a lot of the nuance that's within the book. And it's so funny because like by my standards, this book was fairly short. I read it in a day and a half, like, and there was that much for me to munch on. And the movie's 2 hours, and it's like I just felt kind of cheated a little bit. And again, I feel like I'm railing on it, and I did enjoy the movie. I do think it was good, and had I watched it without reading the book first, I would probably like it a lot more. But this is one case where I'm just like, there was a lot of opportunity here that has just been squandered, and I don't know who's at fault, and I don't know if anybody in particular is at fault, but it feels kind of like a team effort here.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we have to go back to, and I was only, 14 in 1991, so I can't speak to greater cultural issues or what was going on in entertainment. This feels like I could understand going back 30 years and saying, well, this movie, the fact that it got an Academy Award nomination and won says something, because it's not a typical drama. It's a lot more on the horror spectrum than you might expect. So maybe people were kind of giving it credit as this bold, audacious thing based on a blockbuster novel, right? But as far as not the characterization, but the length of the book, because you bring up another good point in terms of adapting it to a 2-hour movie. I feel like you could have done a straight adaptation of the novel and fit it into 2 hours, because a lot of what you have is descriptive. Clarice walks down the long corridor to Hannibal Lecter's cell. It's almost like stage direction, which you can, lop off several pages just by saying, okay, here's essentially your storyboards. The rest is going to be this great dialogue between these characters. But they left out all of this stuff in favor of this randomness. Like when Clarice gets a clue from Lecter to go to a storage locker, in the movie, there's this weird business of this old guy opening it up, and there's this other dude in the car, and they're vaguely European, and they're cranky, and she goes in and finds this car. In the novel, it plays out much differently. Someone gets tipped off, and she's ambushed by a sea of reporters coming out of, when she comes out of the storage locker after having found this mutilated body that has repercussions throughout the next, stretch of the book. That's really interesting in terms of what it's trying to say. They skip over that in favor of this weird, random dialogue. It's almost like the screenwriter thought, I can't just adapt this, because we could have just paid Thomas Harris $1 million to put it into a screenplay format. I have to put my own stamp on it, as you put it, coloring outside the lines, and it just ends up, again, as you're saying, cheating the viewer, especially those who have read the novel. I would love to go back to 91 and survey people who have read the book and said, what do you think about this handling of the material? Because I think it's a big disservice, honestly.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent scene that I had almost forgotten until you just reminded me. But that scene with the media kind of creates this other enemy. It's kind of this unseen. Well, it could be an enemy and an ally. It's this nebulous thing for Clarice, because that first scene puts her in a bad place with the media, because they're like, this lady is treating people bad. She doesn't have her badge or any identification with her. And it becomes like, okay, you have to handle Hannibal Lecter, the monster. You have to handle Buffalo Bill, the unknown, unseen, unheard monster. And you have to handle the monster which is the media. And there are all three of these things that some are working with and against her, some are just against her, and some are just with her. And the media, you don't know. It's kind of like one of the bigger mysteries, because they've dubbed this killer Buffalo Bill, which started as some sort of joke in a newspaper. And it's like, are they sensationalizing for the eyeballs, or can they actually be an ally? And that scene is brilliant in the book, because it makes you suspicious of anybody who's working to just get the eyeballs, right? It's a really cool scene. And it kind of sets the stage for future scenes, even that don't involve the media, because it's like when she is examining, I can't remember the girl's name who passed away like at Buffalo Bill's hand, but she goes to this coroner's office and they're about to do an autopsy, and Clarice is like, all you need to get out of here. And there's like 50 cops in the room. And they're all like a little surprised. And it's kind of this commentary on voyeurism. Like everybody wants to see and know what's going on, even if they're not that involved. And that's another obstacle that Clarice has to overcome. as if dealing with 2 serial killers wasn't enough. And I love that in the book. And you get that scene in the movie with the cops, but you don't get the media scene.
Well, and that scene with the autopsy is great too. We keep pinballing off of each other, like, oh yeah, there's that, because, and this goes back to, again, I'm gonna softly criticize Foster's performance. There's a line, I think it was in, I don't know if it was in the book or if it's really a function of the screenplay, but Lecter says, no matter how hard you try and hide that West Virginia or Tennessee accent or whatever, I'm like, what hiding? I mean, it's cartoonish, but in the novel, you get the sense that Starling is trying to rise above the class that she was born into. And when she goes to that funeral home and there's all those cops milling about because they want to see, Harris puts this thought into her head and reveals it to us as a reader, where she cranks up her kind of hometown Southern accent to say, we see this in the movie, but there's no context to it because it's just Foster using that weird accent. She's like, y'all go home now. You know, you've done the best you could, but you know, y'all go home. She's
come back now, you hear?
Right. But she's trying to unlock that door that she shut because she realizes that that's going to be advantageous in a situation with a bunch of good old boys. She's not going to get very far by just being some FBI suit who's like, you know, a foot shorter than everybody else saying, okay, I need to clear out the room. She's appealing to their sense of Southern decency, you know, like she appreciates everything y'all did for her, but now we need to, you know, her space, and you got to respect that. I'm doing a terrible job, but yeah.
No, it's like you're saying, what I'm hearing is you see Clarice understand that the tools or the things that she thought might be a detriment to her can actually be tools in her arsenal if deployed in the right scenario. And I think that the accent piece is a very small example of that, but her discussions with Lecter, who I'm sure we will get to in a matter of seconds,
we really talked about the star of the big piece of the story. Yeah.
Well, it's like I kind of wanted to and well, maybe we could do Lecter and then, because those are 2 key areas I wanted to discuss. But Clarice's chats with Lecter are interesting because you reading the book, you get the sense, at least I want to see if you agree. That's what I'm asking here. Reading the book, I got the sense that Hannibal is clearly trying to play her, but Clarice is proficient and she's smart, and she kind of knows I can give this information up to him because it will earn me something better for me, right? I kind of get the sense that she knows the game she's playing. She knows it's dangerous and she knows she's taking risks, but she does so in a calculated way. In the movie, I just get the sense that Hannibal's playing her like a fiddle. And, you know, it doesn't feel like she is in control. And I don't know if Jodie Foster was trying to play the whole, I am in control, but I want to seem like I'm not controlled. That's how in control I am. But I didn't pick up on it if she did. So, you know, that's on her.
Well, as far as the filmmaking goes, it's the movie that I was watching in my head reading the novel was different than the one that Demme put out. And a key example of this, which gets to what you're saying, I'm not just rambling, I promise. The dynamic between Starling and Lecter in the book is, you know, it is very much like a dance. She wants something, he wants something, and the thing that she wants also happens to be related to the thing that other people want, which is to save people from being killed. But in the movie, when she goes to visit Lecter that first time, she passes by all these different, you know, cells of the inmates next to him. And there's this guy named Multiple Miggs, who I guess has multiple personality disorder. And as she leaves, he's furiously masturbating. He flings semen onto her. And then the next passage is Lecter hears it or sees it, or he senses something has happened, and he calls out to Clarice to like, oh, please, you know, come back. And he gives her a bit of information and then sends her on her way. I think that's what leads her to the car or the storage garage, if I'm not mistaken. In the movie, yeah, Foster gets the cum in her hair and she's kind of wiping it out and she's disgusted. And then the music starts like pounding. It's like this big melodramatic thing. And then Lecter is pounding on the glass saying, Clarice, come back. And she comes running back and she's like up against the glass and he's up against the glass. The music pounding. He's like, I didn't mean for him to do this. I'm like, no, that's because.
And then he just suddenly uses anagrams as riddles.
Right. Which he came up with on the spot, apparently. But no, it turns it from she's going to earn his respect and not be like all the other analysts and stooges that Dr. Chilton, the guy who runs the assignment, has sent down there, or the other agencies have to try and dissect him. It becomes, oh, she's a girl and something horrible happened to her, so now I kind of feel sorry for her. So I'm going to play with her, but I'm also going to kind of help her out. She earns everything in the book. And in the film, not that it's given to her, it's just that this ruthless character, it seems like he has to be artificially softened because she can't quite make it on her own as far as the audience would understand, if that makes any sense.
It does. It's like a diluted version character. In the book, it's like Hannibal Lecter is kind of a dementor. He siphons the bad feelings out of people, and like that feeds him. It nourishes him. Like you get the sense that any bit of information about sadness from your past is just like, it feels good for him to hear it. And he's kind of like not only a dragon, but a dementor, but like a dragonaut. And it's just like greats. And that pays off in the book. Then when he gives her information, he's like, see, like, I just want a little bit of something and then I'll give you something.
And it's also, it's a guarantee that it's like a guarantee that she's going to keep coming back, whether or not she thinks that you get the feeling she keeps thinking she's done with him. It's like, one last time I got to go see him, but she keeps coming back, and he is able to get a bit more of that mental sustenance that you're talking about.
Yeah, he's just a monster, and it's so fun. I like the back and forth they have in the book is fun to behold. One thing that I talk about in my review, which we've already mentioned, but the two syllables of Clarice, like even the choice of name by Harris is genius because it starts with this hard consonant sound, Clarice, and then it kind of turns into this hiss. And in the book, you just like, you read it and you feel how he's pronouncing it. I don't know if you felt the same way. Hear that in my head vividly. And Anthony Hopkins in the movie delivers it exactly how I wanted. It's just every time you Clarice. And then something I noticed as I was writing this piece, and this may not be across the board, but generally Hannibal calls her Clarice, and so many of her colleagues are Starling. And interesting to me because the name Clarice starts with this hard sound and then ends in this sort of hiss. Starling is so much more tame of a name. It sounds sweet. It sounds like a bird, and it has the word star in there, and ling is such an unoffensive sound. This is the linguist in me coming out, but like there's just so much meaning attached to both of those names, and I applaud Harris for coming up with them. But I applaud him even more for the way that they work in the storytelling. It's almost like you're dealing with two people, Clarice, the lady that deals with Hannibal Lecter, and Starling, the detective. And that, like I said, is not a thing you get in the movie. You might pick up on it, but like the two characters aren't distinct. She has her guard up with Lecter, but she knows what she needs to give away. Whereas when she's with her FBI guys, it's all business because she knows she's not going to get their respect if she isn't proficient at what she does. And I love that juxtaposition. It's something I mentioned in my review, but I just had to bring it up because the movie does none of that. And the names are so powerful. I mean, Hannibal itself is a powerful name because, spoiler alert, it rhymes with cannibal. And it's just, the names are fascinating to me, particularly Clarice Starling. And I just love how Harris handles them.
Yeah, and I hadn't really picked up on that that dichotomy of Clarice and Starling. In fact, the next time I read Silence of the Lambs, which I guarantee I'm going to read this book again someday because it's so great, I'm going to probably have that in mind. Yeah, Anthony Hopkins, it's perfect. And now, because he's such a cultural icon, I had him in mind while I was reading the book, so it wasn't that much of a stretch for me. I even imagined Jodie Foster, but I had been so long since I'd seen the film that I didn't imagine her talking like that. I guess I just kind of imagined her more in her natural Jodie Foster voice, which honestly, she could have. Maybe we talked about this before, but there are some movies that try and do a shorthand where it's like, oh, this guy's from New York, so he's like, oh yeah, yo, I'm from Brooklyn, like that. It's just like everyone has to talk like the worst stereotype of the region.
Where's the water?
Right.
I want a view of water.
Yeah, I'm from Tennessee. No, so instead of just like, yeah, but that was the other funny thing is there's a a newspaper clipping, I think, in the film that referred to Hannibal Lecter when I think it was Jodie Foster going through the microfiche or something, looking up his history, and it said Baltimore doctor convicted of horrors. I'm like, okay, I guess it's possible that Hannibal settled in Baltimore and worked there, so he's a Baltimore doctor. But this guy's like European, Hopkins, to his credit, his accent is very hard to pin down. It sounds kind of like amorphous, almost like this something the devil would be able to do to appeal to various different people and speak in different, he has many names. But yeah, just to pin that on, like, yeah, he's a Baltimore doctor. I'm like, this is not just some guy who grew up in Baltimore and started killing people. He's like an international serial killer.
Yeah, he is. Well, that's the thing. The nuance that you want from Clarice is found, and Anthony Hopkins he is by far the star of the show. And it's funny because when I told my friends we were doing this as one of our episodes, they were like, oh yeah, Anthony Hopkins is only in it for like 15 minutes, but he steals the show. And I'm like, I watched that whole movie and like half of it was him. So I don't know what you were talking about, but that's fair. And he is just an insane actor. And the one thing that my heart kind of weeps for Anthony Hopkins in the movie, because in the book, Hannibal isn't necessarily, this is weird to say, but he isn't necessarily painted as the villain. He is not the primary antagonist. He is a bad dude through and through. You know that, right? But in some ways, he is a ally, which is super interesting. And James Gumb, who you get the actual perspective throughout the book, is a terrifying villain. And like, he is the antagonist to me in the book. Like I said, it's nebulous. There's all sorts of different readings of it. But like in the movie, it almost seems to me like they're trying to make Hannibal the villain. And he's playing mind games, but what does he have to lose? Like, the best scenario for him is getting a new cell with The View. The worst case is, I don't know, staying where he is. So why not make it fun, like, and they kind of try to make him the villain. And it's like, in the movie, you have to assume he is currently paying for his crimes because he's a cell. And in the book, you're like, you get that that's all over. You get who the character is, and you get that he's plotting for something, but he's not painted as like, this is the villain. He's painted as a weird, shape-shifting kind of Snape-ish character. So many Harry Potter comparisons. I'm so sorry, but he's just like, you don't know truly what he is and what he's going to offer to the story until you actually find out what it is. It's like, and that's what's fascinating about Hannibal is he can be both a villain and a helper / ally in the book, whereas the movie I don't get that as much, and that's because you don't get as many James Gumb scenes. You're just supposed to be scared of this guy about which you know virtually nothing other than that he kills people. I get that. It's scary. But what makes him so much more vicious than any other killer? What makes him more effective? You get that stuff in the book, and that's what I appreciated about the villainous side of things.
Yeah, I mean, like, I almost have a slight opposite criticism to what you're saying, which is in the novel, Hector, Hannibal Lecter, aka Hector.
Hector Lannibal.
Yes. Hector Lannibal needs to be unlocked. He does speak sort of in riddles, but it's not quite as cartoonish as it is as portrayed in the film. And you're right. He's in his cell. The worst that Chilton can really do is kind of take his drawings away and just have him sit there and be bored. But as we've seen, he's got a terrific memory and senses of smell and a great imagination. So he can just kind of go off into his own head for long periods of time. And if other people show up, he's not like delighted to see them. The thing that really bugged me watching the movie, and I think this is even in the trailer, I'd forgotten about it, was at one point he says, "I'll help you catch him, Clarice." At no point in the novel does Hannibal Lecter actively say, "I'm going to help you get this guy." It's all like, I know what you need to know, and if you play my game just right, you might get that information, but we're not buddies.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have a rapport,
that's exactly it.
Yeah. And so again, it felt very mainstream, very easy to me, because I could just see if that was adapted faithfully to the screen, audiences going, why won't he help that, poor lady? There's people out there dying, which is one of the horrific ideas from the novel, which is, yeah, Lecter could have stopped almost all of these murders by, reading about, like, from the first or this, I guess it would be the second, because he's, when you see a pattern of the Buffalo Bill murders, which are highly publicized, he could have gone to Chilton or anybody and said, pretty sure this is someone I knew, or someone that I knew, and here's where he
Right.
lives. But he doesn't. He sat on this for like 6 murders and a kidnapping.
Yeah, he just doesn't care. And that's the joy of Lecter, is like the riddles are what make this book fun. Like when he says Buffalo Bill lives in a 2-story house, or towards the end when he says, Clarice, isn't this so desperately random where these are occurring? You know, you know in the, like, here's the thing. Harris doesn't hold your hand. He doesn't give you this heavy-handed, ham-fisted, I'm gonna help you catch him. Like, it's, you know that Hannibal has the keys to the proverbial kingdom. Like, you know that he has the answer fairly early on. And that's the fun of it, is what riddles is he going to give Clarice, and can she solve them? That's the tension that the novel creates, not even so much that James Gumb has kidnapped and murdered people. It's just, can she solve it? It's like a time bomb, right? And it's not that it's one explosion, it's that it's an explosion every time somebody dies, and then it just restarts, right? It's another 36 hours, 72 hours, whatever. In the movie, it, like I said, it is heavy-handed and ham-fisted and saying, I'll help you catch him. But like, as a viewer, like, wouldn't you know that already? Isn't that kind of the idea? I just like, it feels like you're kind of underestimating the audience when you put in a line like that. And it's disappointing. And it's not even a deal breaker. It's just like, this was unnecessary. This isn't a kid's movie. You don't need to explain to me the workings of the world. I can understand through context clues that Hannibal knows something that we need, because otherwise, why would she be talking to him? It's those kind of easy assumptions I want to be able to make, and that way I feel smart rather than I feel like the movie makers think I'm dumb.
That's a very good distinction. I'm also thinking of the girl who's kidnapped at the bottom of the well in Buffalo Bill's house. She's the daughter of a U.S. senator, and Senator Martin is a much more prevalent presence and character in the book. And they kind of butcher a sequence of events where Clarice finds some Polaroids in a bedroom. They were actually in the kidnapped daughter's room, and the mother was there and kind of questioning like her daughter's social life, because you get this idea of like, oh, it's the senator's daughter, but she was kind of a low life. And one of the interesting details I thought towards the end of the novel, which you sort of get an idea of in the last part of the film, but it read as much harsher in the book, was this kidnapping victim at the bottom of the well when Clarice breaks in, and she's like, I'm here to save you, but there's this Buffalo Bill is in here and I got to go find him and take him out, but I'll be right back. And from the bottom of the well, she's like, don't you fucking leave me, you fucking bitch. I'm like, what? Because the feeling you get throughout the novel of the Martin family is not a very flattering one. So even when you've got this person who's a victim of kidnapping, Thomas Harris wants you to consider them as a full person and not just a victim. Like, yeah, awful people get kidnapped too.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I hadn't even thought of it from that angle, which is funny considering the state of our U.S. Senate right now. But it's just, no matter which political side you find yourself on. But it's, I never really considered that. I thought it was interesting that the mom, the senator, was trying to cut up. And to me, it just read as like, oh, she's just protecting her daughter. But then now that you say that, I realize, oh, she was protecting her own ass, her own reputation, because if those photos got anywhere, either as evidence or whatever, that could be the end of her career, knowing that her daughter has these pictures wherever, which is like even sadder in and of itself, because people can have these private pictures wherever they want. And obviously there's risks attached, but like, that's really sad, knowing that the senator didn't really care that much about the impact of the pictures on her daughter, probably on some level, but mostly I can't have these getting out because myself. That's like the extent of it.
Right. And the idea of, this is something I just thought of, and perhaps in a more modern context, but I guess it would apply in 88 or 91. Those sexually compromised photos of the daughter, if Clarice had even handed those off to an officer or an FBI agent, there's no guarantee that they wouldn't have been, copied or maybe one of the Polaroids got lost and sent to a news
Hmm.
station, and going back to this tabloid kind of news cycle thing, which is something we didn't really talk about, was Clarice's run-ins with the media also play a role in her dicey career at the FBI, and whether she's going to get recycled or is she going to get punished for becoming a media sensation instead of doing her schoolwork. So there's so many layers to this story, which go on almost between the lines of this book, which is a very brisk and cinematic read, that to watch the actual cinematic version of it play out and like, but wait a second, where is all of this great development? It's nowhere. Now, the biggest disappointment, and this is going to bring us back to James Gumb, because I know you're itching to talk about him. In that car in the storage facility, well, let's rewind the tape. The car, which is a hearse,
Hmm.
is under a tarp in the novel. In the movie, it's an American flag. I don't know, and I didn't do any reading on this. Maybe you've got some insight as an outsider. The American flag imagery is all over this film, like Michael Bay puts American flags in his movies. I don't know if you caught this, but there are flags everywhere. It's covering the hearse. There's one when Lecter strings up the one cop at the end in his, kind of grand guignol, death art piece. He's wrapped in, red, white, and blue ribbons. After James Gumb gets killed by Clarice, there's a close-up of an American flag on a stand right next to the window that's been blown out. There's a Nazi poster in the background talking about like America, fascism or something. I don't know what was going on there or what Demme/Tally was trying to say, but none of that was in the book.
I didn't pick up on that even the slightest bit. I remember those scenes, having you describe them back to me, and like I vividly remember the flag being on the car and the flag where after Hannibal does his thing, as it were. But I didn't pick up on the thread, and that's interesting because those scenes are there and they exist within the world of the movie. But I guess I question what commentary that they would fulfill, if any, because none of the dialogue, acting, storytelling, etc., has any sort of commentary on this is the state of America or American government or the American dream. And I mean, it feels really convoluted to have to say like, oh, well, maybe it's a commentary on the systems that allow a person like James Gumb to become who he is. And like, that seems like the easiest reading of it to me. But it also seems like I had to do all the legwork myself to get there, which is not what symbolism is about, in my humble opinion.
Right, because thinking about it now, I'm just like, well, maybe they were trying to say something like, "This is Reagan's America," because this is like the tail end of his, or I guess it would have been G, W, not W, HW, like leading and kind of pre-Clinton, because this is in '91. This is before that election, but
Mhm.
yeah, it just felt very kind of ham-handed. And again, there's so much in the novel that speaks to the problems that I would assume that they have as critiques of the culture, that if they had just focused on that instead of like, we're going to have another flag in here. I think
Mhm.
I after this, it was kind of like the Buffalo Bill murders. After the second one, I began to notice a pattern. I started writing them all down in my notebook. I'm like, what is this?
Is it probably? It's probably like 6 pages long. Um,
Well,
yeah,
okay.
it doesn't. I'm surprised that I didn't notice that, and well, I guess I'm not, because it's just like, what purpose did that serve if a viewer who read the book and didn't pick up on any message that would otherwise involve an American flag? Like, what's the reason for shoehorning that in? I don't know. It all feels a little bit messy to me now that I think back on that specific element of the film.
Yeah. Now let's talk about Ted Levine, the actor who played Buffalo Bill, aka James Gumb, aka yeah, like three aliases. Uh,
John Grant. I can't
yeah,
remember the other one.
yeah. Some maybe it was John Gordon too, or something like that. Yeah,
Jack Gordon.
Jack Gordon. Okay. Um, so what did you think of his performance? And just him as a character. We kind of talked about the trans issue, and there was, from what I was reading a bit on Wikipedia before we jumped on, there was some protest about the film when it came out from the trans community. Now, I'm going to speak to my own ignorance of the trans community, but I would imagine that it was much smaller and even like far more marginalized than it is in 2021 back in
Right.
1991. So, but I can kind of understand where they might be coming from if they hadn't read the book, because The Silence of the Lambs as a story is not a transphobic story, but there's an argument to be made, I think, that the film toys with that a bit.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it circles the rim. Well, I don't know. I think the movie is, um, is outright transphobic in many ways within those scenes in particular, and it's sad because it's like we said, the book deals with this issue in a very, I think, educational way, and it doesn't by any means solve any issues related to transphobia, but it does approach the problem from the angle of, listen, this is a very private thing for many people, and it's also a very difficult and deep personal struggle. And there are reasons behind all of the tests these doctors perform. There are reasons for the privacy that they require. And this person was declined for many specific reasons. And it kind of lays out the criteria for when a person might get sexual reassignment surgery. And again, this is from the 80s. I'm sure that Thomas Harris did some research, and so many things have changed since then. But given the time when this came out, I was rather impressed with the handling of it. And I was legitimately happy. I specifically told Aaron about it. I said, I've heard things about the movie, but the book actually handled this pretty well. And then when I watched the movie, I was disappointed. I was incredibly disappointed with James Gunn. The performance itself was fine, but it's incredibly limited in its view of what being trans means, at least to my understanding. And again, I'm so far removed from that community, and I'm trying to learn more about it just as a person generally. And you know, that's not like something to celebrate, like I said, in and of itself. It's just we need to kind of look through that lens when we're watching this type of media. And all you see here is this guy dancing around saying, "Do you want to fuck me? I would fuck me." And then he has a bunch of dresses, and it's like, that's not what a trans person is. That's not who a trans person is. And it paints a very dangerous picture of the trans community, which is so far from anything violent that it's just, it literally saddens me to see it portrayed in that way, to see the community represented in such a misinformed light. And I guess that's where I really struggled the most, was there's opportunity for a good educational and meaningful story that highlights the struggles of that community. And this film just does away with all of that. And I was just so, I was just downtrodden seeing that. and it's a shame too, because the actor who plays James Gunn, I actually think had a ton of potential to be amazing. Part of it is because the book gives you a ton of point of view scenes from James Gunn, which is one of the book's strengths, I think, is the rotating points of view. And in the movie, you get him for like 2 seconds and he shouts a few times. And you get that something is wrong with him. And that's another problem with the whole, he's a transsexual, which is a different term that you're not even supposed to use anymore. So it's just like, there's so many missed marks here. And I've rambled on for however long, but basically my point is, like, if you're going to discuss a marginalized community who has a history of being oppressed and discriminated against, do your research and get it done right, even if it's 1991.
Well, I think in fairness to, and this is not an excuse, but it may be a reason, we didn't really have the internet back in 1991 or 1988. So a lot of the media that we had, people's perceptions was based on a very limited media that was run by, it could be argued, very limited people. So there was a lot of, if you want to take this beyond, trans, look at gays and how homosexuals were represented in popular culture, either as kind of swishy, flamboyant, sidekicks, or as serial killers. It's kind of the same paradigm. They weren't really considered to be fully realized people. And in the novel, Thomas Harris does make James Gunn into a monster, but he does draw a distinction with the people outside of James Gunn who are hunting him down and trying to deal with him. That, it's almost like a PSA where he's having that conversation with a doctor to say, this guy failed all of our tests because of trauma. I think he says something like, most transsexuals, like 99% of transsexuals are just, they're regular people they feel that they are not in the body that they were supposed to be born into, the kind of thing that we sort of take for granted here in the 21st century.
Right.
But he very explicitly says, hey, reader, I know what you're thinking. You're wrong.
Yep.
This is not all trans. This is a very specific type of monster who is sort of adopting this idea that he has in his head of what he thinks he is or wants to be, but he's also crazy. So
right. It's even more powerful for that reason, because it's showing how people can latch onto communities that are ostracized and try to use them for their own gain. And like I said, the book does a really great thing with regard to that kind of topic. I was listening to a podcast with one of my favorite content creators recently, and she's just this, she doesn't do much drawing anymore, but she does a lot of writing, and it was about how problematic content can and should be viewed, historically, because I completely get that things are a product of their time. And we've watched so many movies with various issues that you kind of have to overlook. But I think that I've approached it in the past from the wrong angle, where I've thought, I need to overlook this, when that's not the case. She said in this podcast, and I wish I could remember what it was called, but something along the lines of, problematic content doesn't preclude you from watching, viewing, reading it, right? She said, the reason we call it problematic is so that you can acknowledge the problems and learn from them. Otherwise, what's the point? Otherwise it's just censorship or overlooking, and both of which are different sides of the same terrible spectrum. And I think that this is a movie that can teach valuable lessons about the mishandling of the LGBT community specifically. And the book is the opposite end of things, that can actually teach people a good lesson. So I guess I don't want to harp too much on this, but if you're watching The Silence of the Lambs now, I would encourage you to just think about how it handles the trans community in the wrong way, and what we could learn from that in the future. And I think that's the lesson you really want to take from it. If you're watching it now, there's nothing wrong with enjoying a piece of problematic content, as long as you're not enjoying it for those problems itself, is where I'm coming from.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the term trans community, because it would be interesting to see, maybe I'm fleshing out a thought here, and that's not a pun because the guy's making
James Gunn.
Yeah, right. But the idea that he's not part of a community. He is alone and kind of like inside his own thoughts and making up this persona based on what he thinks or has heard or read or believes in his demented brain. But there's not one could draw that idea that all trans people are like this, and they're so other, that they're all crazy and they want to kill people. But it would be interesting to see in a remake, or maybe even a TV show about Clarice Starling that covers similar ground, talking to other trans characters and getting that point of view. I hate to say this, but just to show that they're regular people too. That
right. Yeah, it's an educational opportunity, and that's I think where it missed the mark, right? It's but that's the thing. If shifting gears slightly, outside of this whole issue, which is a problem that is, I think fairly isolated within the book. I think other things that or in the movie, I think the movie handles other things fairly well, like we said, the sexism and stuff. But it doesn't get a pass by any stretch. However, in the book, Jane Gum is a fascinating character, even beyond and above all these issues and all the social relevance today, because you get what all the true crime people love these days, which is, and this is not true crime, but it's crime. You see the inner workings of what he's doing. You see his basement dungeon. You see him kidnap Catherine Martin. You get a sense for like how he functions. And that's the dramatic irony of it all, where we know a little bit about how he works and what he's doing as Clarice tries to figure it out. And it's incredibly deftly handled, because it's really hard to do that, to dole out some information to a reader while withholding enough to make you feel like you can relate to the person who's also trying to figure it out. And I applaud Thomas Harris for that, because the whole time I was like, this is just fantastic. I know just enough about James Gum to hate him, but I don't know enough about him to know where he is or all the inner workings of his his crazy mind. And that was just fantastic to me.
I also, these kind of hints, because one of the things that the movie leaves out is the spider web of how James Gumb and Hannibal Lecter know each other, because Hannibal was hanging out with this guy named Raspale.
Mhm.
Raspel was one of Lecter, or Lecter was one of his, or he was one of Lecter's clients. Raspel was into guys and was dating this guy named Klaus after he dated James Gumb, and I think Lecter said that he was actually in some kind of a setting with James Gumb, like he was sort of this peripheral character, and that's how he remembered him. The movie leapfrogs over all of that and has the Klaus character be the body that's in the car that Clarice finds with the head in the jar. And, I think, or no, sorry, that was Raspale in the movie.
Mhm.
In the book, I believe it was Klaus, because in the film, Raspale is killed by James Gumb. Is that right?
I can't remember, to be completely honest.
I'm getting there's some, my memory is getting Swiss cheese, but essentially the idea was in the film version, the body in the car was actually one of Buffalo Bill's earlier victims, whereas in the book, or I think the book, I think Lecter killed him, and that's how he was able to lead Starling to that body. But the whole idea, the head in the jar, I don't think this is a detail in the novel. In the movie, we see it. It's got like cartoonish makeup on.
Mhm.
It's like, oh yeah, this is another trans person or someone in drag or something like that. It wasn't just, a person that it's almost like the audience wouldn't understand how this guy who thinks he's a woman and is dressing up like that would be in a relationship with someone who was not also that. Like there's a lot of nuance in the novel as far as characters' sexuality and social circles that's just completely stripped down and dumbed down for the movie language.
Yeah, the book leaves a lot of room for you to determine the identities of these people without ever assigning a label to them, really, with the somewhat exception of James Gumb. But even then, it's revealed that this identity was wrongfully attached to him, right? And in the movie, it's just like, here's what you're supposed to think, like it. And
Yeah.
it feels so, I don't know what the word is. I've used heavy-handed so much, but it just feels forced. Everything feels like the movie is asking you to think something specific instead of just inviting you to explore the ideas within. And that's what I loved about the book was, here's what's happening. You're just privy to the story, and you kind of have to draw your own conclusions about many of the mysteries within. Like, where did Hannibal go? That kind of thing. Whereas in the movie, it's just, I don't know. There's not much room for interpretation in the movie, and that's where a lot of the problems are encased.
Yeah, and I think um, that's why a straight adaptation, I think, would have been a lot more beneficial to the story. The thing that was really jarring to me is the whole Hannibal Lecter escape, which seems to go on for it's almost like a 20-minute short film plopped within this Buffalo Bill story. And it's a wonderful, brilliant, and gory set piece where he tricks these, two cops who are coming in to turn his cell over. He sneaks a bit of a pen that he's dismantled to make
Mm-hmm.
a handcuff pick. And then this whole like swapping identities with the face mask, or the literal face mask. But then once that happens, it's like we're plopped right back into, oh yeah, that's right. This is a movie about Clarice Starling hunting Buffalo Bill. There's sort of that transition in the novel, but it's part of a current of all this other stuff that's sort of coming to a head, these other subplots that we've kind of mentioned that were dropped, that it's not nearly as jarring. It's much more deftly handled and incorporated. Whereas by the time this was over, I'm like, oh yeah, there's a guy who's skinning people, but now I kind of want to find out what Hannibal Lecter is going to do. It's
Yeah.
almost like, and stay tuned for the sequel, but you've got 30 minutes left of this other movie.
Yeah. In the book, I feel like in a way, Hannibal doesn't care if people die, but it feels like he's kind of a little bit irked that there's somebody else doing what he loves to do in such a limelight, right? And it's kind of like, okay, I'm Hannibal. I need to give Clarice as much information as I can so that she can solve the case, and I can get out of here and then go start doing my thing. And in the book, that's an interpretation that I have come to. So it's not like everyone's going to feel that way, and I don't think it's exactly like telegraphed in the book. but I kind of felt a little bit like there's a tinge of jealousy in Lecter. There's a tinge of appreciation for what Buffalo Bill's doing, but he also feels like it's a little sloppy and he knows he can do it better. So watching this progression of like, I want Clarice to catch him, but I want it to benefit me as much as possible, culminate in this escape is really fascinating. And the book, that's one of the most riveting scenes in my opinion, because you're just like, what is happening? And the movie does it well. It's well produced, it's well acted, everything about it is good, but you don't have that extra context that made the book's escape such a joy to read.
Yeah. One bit of, it's a cameo, and I actually had to pause the movie and go look this up to see if I was seeing things. But in the film, in the scene where Clarice is being dragged out by the by the agents who are watching Lecter, one of them, who's off on the left hand of the screen, he looks back directly at the camera. I'm like, is that George Romero, the director of Night of the Living Dead? It turns out it was.
Well, there you go.
But no, it's. I like that kind of multi-layered theory that you have about Lecter's relationship to the idea of Buffalo Bill. But I also just, there was I'm trying to find a thought that I just lost. It's lost. It's gone. I don't know what to do with it. Oh,
it's in a storage unit somewhere.
Yeah, full of spiders. Here's something I want to end on. Okay, sorry, two things I want to end on. One, The Silence of the Lambs is a great final line for the book. It's also the book's title. That scene where Clarice is falling asleep and she no longer hears the lambs screaming. I thought that and the last scene with Jack Crawford, like thinking about his wife, were two great pieces of poetry in this incredibly disturbing book. And it shows what this story could be in the right hands. But I still don't understand the damn thing with the lambs and why this was such a traumatic thing that has haunted Clarice Starling for the last 12 to 15 years. Because I assume she's like supposed to be 22 or 25. I'm like, she was 10 when this happened. Yeah, her parents are dead and she gets sent to live with a cousin or an uncle or something. She runs away one morning because she gets up before dawn and goes out to the barn, and it turns out they're killing lambs and she can hear them screaming. I'm like, and she picks one up and runs away, but then she gets caught and taken back. But she had tried to free the lambs, so they're like running out, and then the uncle or whoever gets all pissed and sends her away to a foster home. I get it. I understand why she did it. I also understand why he was pissed, because that's like their livelihood. But did no one ever sit her down and say, hey, this is what we kind of do here? You might hear some weird things, but as a circle of life stuff. Because I had forgotten what The Silence of the Lambs meant 30 years ago when I first saw the movie. I was thinking it was like some deep psychological thing, like when Hannibal Lecter was like, did your uncle touch you? Were you abused? Did he beat you? And she's like, no, I just woke up one morning and heard some lambs crying. It made me sad, and I haven't been able to get over it.
Yeah, and in the book, it's a horse. I mean, the lambs are the ones screaming, but she takes like a gentled horse.
That's right.
And tries to escape with it. And that's not in the movie at all, but it's a little tonally mismatched in the movie, and even in the book it's a little bit hard to grasp. But I think that what Harris was going for was just that kind of poetry in motion. I think that Clarice's backstory is meant to serve her as a character and not necessarily meant to serve this narrative driving force, which we already kind of have in Buffalo Bill. I will say, I think that The Silence of the Lambs is just a brilliant title for a book. It's just fantastic. I mean, there are a few books that spring to mind when I think of good titles. The Silence of the Lambs, The Name of the Wind, which is structured very similarly in title, and The Lies of Loch Lamora, which is also these titles they make you feel something, and they give you an idea of what the book could be, which hopefully it fulfills, and it's like, when I think about my favorite titles ever and their relation to the book that they advertise, this is right up there with them. Whether or not you completely buy into the story, I just think that those, what is it, The Silence of the 5 words is that's prime. Chef's kiss.
I'm right there with you. It's a fantastic title, but I just imagine, like, couldn't have Harris have just said, I was in the barn one morning and my uncle, maybe the dad didn't die, but my uncle and my dad were having a dispute and my uncle shot my dad. It made the lambs scream. And so I associated that with my dad dying. Plus
Right.
I want to fight crime because my uncle got away and something like that. But like
Hannibal Lecter ordered lamb chops.
Yes. That was
I didn't notice that until the movie. So props to the movie. I was like, this is phenomenal.
Yeah, for sure. Last point that the movie does get right. At least they make a decision that in the novel, Clarice kind of ends up with one of the lab techs. I don't know if there's the Smithsonian or some like institute where they're just examining the death's head moths. And that's fine. It's a nice little romantic kind of scene that ends the film and contains that line, because I think they were in bed together or something, and that's when she fell asleep and the lambs were silent, or Silence of the Lambs. In the movie, they show this guy, and no offense, but he's like a cross-eyed, jagged-toothed doofus. I'm like, there cannot be a love story here. Not Jodie Foster and that guy. Unfortunately, they dropped him. He was just like, him and his buddy were like wacky sidekicks who showed up for 2 scenes, and she ended up, on her own, which I was thoroughly happy with.
Well, especially, setting aside his appearance in the movie, he says something to her, and then the other doctor's like, "Oh, are you flirting?" And he's like, "Yeah."
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay, dude. But yeah, I agree. The ending scene was just great. I love the you mentioned this earlier, but the cinematography of the book, which feels like a weird phrase to say, is just fantastic. He sets the scene really well, Harris does. Even if it's just a quick, like, I have to end this book. Here's like drone footage of the house, zoom in, like Citizen Kane style, come through the window, like, oh, this is big movie making. This is revolutionary. And it was just the way that the is that is fantastic. Anyway, I have one update from Aaron in weeks. If you have anything else to say, Silence of the Lambs, speak now or forever hold your peace.
No. So what have you guys been watching?
So we actually haven't watched much else since we chatted last, but I already recommended this to you via message, but I want to put it out there for anybody listening. And I've said this phrase at least twice throughout this podcast, in and of itself. It is on Hulu, and I don't want to overhype something, but like, this is one of the best pieces of creative storytelling that I have ever seen. It is just phenomenal. You're supposed to go in knowing as little as possible, keeping your phone off, and I want people to do that. But just to give you an idea of like what to expect, I won't spoil anything, but it's a stage show that was recorded and put on Hulu, executive produced by Stephen Colbert, directed by Frank Oz, and performed by this guy named Derek DelGaudio. And he is a magician, but he is many other things. He's a storyteller. He's a card shuffler. He's a sharp. He's all these different things. And he tells these stories and interweaves them with some of his talents. And the result is just so emotionally impactful. Everybody we've told to watch it has just been like floored. And we're just super excited to share it with people. So if anybody gets a chance to watch it, I implore you, in and of itself on Hulu. They're not paying me to say this. That's how much I enjoy it.
Is it a series, is it a movie, or is it just a one-off
It's
show?
a 90-minute one-off. I would call it essentially a movie, but it was performed live, and you're seeing live recorded performances of it. It is just, it's unbelievable. It just feels like a new form of storytelling that's just so fresh and honest, and it's just it's incredibly fun and impactful. Like we both cried, laughed. It was just I can slam every cliche at it that you can possibly think of, and like, but this type of thing is the reason cliches exist. Like, this is the diamond in the rough, it's like, it's that good. It really is.
I feel like you could put that on the poster and people would be like, this is high praise or a terrible condemnation. This is the reason cliches exist.
Well, and it's so hard to, like, even that's the best recommendation I can give, because it is so important that you watch it knowing as little as possible, that like it's almost completely impossible to actually summarize it. And the best thing I can say is just to watch it. It's absolutely fantastic. We're going to watch it again probably this weekend, because that's how much we enjoyed it. But we haven't watched any other movies since, because we did our movie night for Silence of the Lambs this week, and then we watched that. But I'm sure I will have more updates in the coming weeks, because it is about Antarctica temperature in Chicago, so I cannot leave the house, even though I couldn't anyway because of COVID.
Very good. Well, whatever you end up watching, I'm excited to hear what makes the rotation. Probably just watch The Shining another 12 times, huh?
Or Birds of Prey. Oh wait, the Snyder Cut. We have to watch that because it's going to be trash. And you saw my tweet a few weeks ago where I was like, this, DC Universe stands now. The Snyder Cut's going to change everything. DC Universe fans, after the Snyder Cut comes out, we all knew it was going to be terrible. So can't wait for that.
You know, it's weird because even to call it the Snyder Cut, because it's going to be like a series. They're like doing half-hour or hour-long episodes, chopping it up into 6 parts or whatever. I don't know. I'll watch it. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, but
well, fingers crossed that it is as terrible as we hope. Also, I just want to send a shout out to you and Fowley and E-Man and I believe it's Don. I can't remember all their names.
Mm-hmm.
I am loving your WandaVision recaps because Aaron and I are big fans of the series. And I watch the episode on the weekends, and then the next Monday I like to watch your recap. So thank you guys for doing those because I think they're super fun. And I will throw you a like and a subscribe, even though I've already done the subscribe part.
Well, thank you. We all appreciate that. And if you ever get to join us in the chat on a Friday night, we'd love to have you.
Excellent. I'm going to take you up on that. Maybe for the season finale, I'll pop in.
All right.
Throw some wacky theories.
We love wacky theories. But all right, man, we are getting into Silence of the Lambs runtime territory. So I'm going to let you go. But no, thanks so much for talking. I wasn't sure because I know from our messaging back and forth that we're both big fans of the book. And I know that I had kind of oversold my enthusiasm for the movie based on my recollection from 30 years ago. But then after having watched it again, I'm like, oh no. So I'm glad to find that we're on the same page.
There we go. Hey, at least you didn't read Ready Player 2. That was torture waiting to happen.
I'm gonna do that someday because I am a glutton for punishment. But anyway, till next time, whenever that is, whatever that is.
What, damn it? All right, I will catch you later.
I'll catch you later. All right, bye.